Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Philip Kantoff. He's joining us here as co-founder and CEO of Convergent Therapeutics. Convergent Therapeutics is a clinical stage therapeutical company focused on developing next-generation radiopharmaceutical therapies for cancer. He's going to talk about the development of a radio-antibody. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Philip Kantoff. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Neil. Good to be here.
Well, as a co-founder and CEO of Convergent Therapeutics, give us a brief look into your professional background and talk about what prompted you to found Convergent.
Thanks for the question. So I'm a medical oncologist by training and was at the Dana Farber Cancer Institute for almost 30 years. I ran the Genitourinary Oncology program, including the prostate cancer program. I was the head of the Solid Tumor Division and the head of clinical research there. And then I moved to New York to become the chairman of medicine at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where I was for 6 years. And I personally wanted to move back to Boston and looked around at opportunities. And I came across Convergent Therapeutics as a fantastic opportunity for me and for patients because of the technology and the clinical data that had been generated before I started.
What are the current treatments for prostate cancer, and is there an unmet need for these treatments?
Much like other cancers, prostate cancer can be cured when detected early, when all the cancer resides in the prostate, by either removing it surgically or by treating it with radiation or a combination of hormonal therapy plus radiation. But unfortunately, there's a large proportion of men who either present with advanced disease where the tumor has metastasized already or relapse after radiation or surgery. Approximately 35,000 men each year die in the United States of prostate cancer, and about 350,000 men die globally. So although there have been advances in the treatment of advanced prostate cancer over the past 10 to 15 years, extending people's lives, it's still a disease where if you relapse or present with metastatic disease, the majority of the time you succumb to the disease. So the unmet need is to try to cure advanced prostate cancer. And our technology, which is, as you mentioned before, Neil, the development of radio-antibodies is a very promising avenue to take. So prostate cancer expresses a protein on its surface called prostate-specific membrane antigen. It's also expressed on the normal prostate, but expressed even more in patients with prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. And we have an antibody directed at prostate-specific membrane antigen known as CONV-01, CONV-01. And this has high specificity and high avidity for the prostate-specific membrane antigen. And our strategy is to combine this antibody with a radioisotope. And one of the emerging technologies right now is the availability of an ideal isotope to use, and that is Actinium-225. Actinium-225 is an alpha-emitting radiopharmaceutical, and alpha particles are enormously powerful at killing cancer cells. They also don't scatter very much. They have a very narrow path length, so there's great precision with Actinium-225. It has a half-life of 10 days, which is ideal. So we have combined the antibody with Actinium-225 and administered this to patients with advanced prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned before, the results are very promising.
Now, is this precision what sets Novartis' approach apart?
Novartis has developed a slightly different strategy, and that is using a small peptide, not an antibody, but a small peptide, and linking it to a beta particle, not an alpha particle, the beta particle being lutetium-177. And beta particles are far less powerful and have more scatter than do alpha particles. So the strategy differs from Novartis' strategy in two ways. One is using an antibody rather than a ligand, and using an alpha particle rather than a beta particle. Okay. So our early clinical studies so far have shown that the antibody linked to actinium-225 is very effective in treating advanced prostate cancer. In our first study, we administered the antibody linked to actinium-225, known as COMVO-1 alpha, to 32 patients with advanced prostate cancer. Many of these patients had received prior surgery, radiation, hormonal therapies, secondary hormonal therapies, chemotherapy, and even received the radioligand, which is the ligand attached to the beta particle. And remarkably, in this single dose escalation study, 45% of the patients had a response to the treatment. And interestingly, patients who had been treated with the radioligand responded just as well as those who had not received the radioligand. We've now gone on to use multiple doses, and we're seeing even more effective responses in patients who have received multiple doses, and the toxicity is minimal. The toxicity is limited to what we call hematopoietic toxicity, mild reversible decrease in platelet counts, and patients don't notice this. There's no bleeding or anything like that, so it's very well tolerated. Another strategy that we are using is combining the radio-antibody with the radioligand. So we think that there's complementarity, if not synergy, between the two. And that is shown in preclinical studies by the fact that the antibody increases the uptake and retention within the tumor of the radioligand. In addition, you can put different payloads on the antibody and the ligand. The ligand is attached to a beta particle. The antibody is attached to an alpha particle. And when you combine the two, there's enormous synergy between the two. And the biodistributions of the antibody and the ligand are different, where the ligand, the radioligand, is excreted through the kidneys, the radioantibody is excreted through the hepatobiliary system. So the distribution of the two different agents is different, but they both are capable of focusing on the tumor. So they synergize at the tumor, and they don't overlap with regard to toxicity. And the results preclinically and now clinically are extremely promising with regard to responses and duration of responses.
Give us a website where we can learn more about Convergent and possibly about the study as well.
Absolutely. Our website is convergentrx.com.
Philip, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for lending us some of your time this morning and giving us this information. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Neil. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Philip Kantoff, co-founder and CEO of Convergent Therapeutics. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.